Park here. I bet you're cranking out more content now than ever, and it's important that it converts customers. But chances are, unless you are intentionally telling stories, you're probably not being heard. So, I'm excited to announce our first public Business of Story Masterclass and Deliberate Practice program starting Thursday, June 6, 2019, right here in Phoenix, Arizona. In our half-day hands-on session that kicks off the program, you'll learn the applied science and bewitchery of storytelling and how to hack the core consciousness of your audiences. During the following 7 weeks, we're going to use the Thinkific online platform to deliver you a storytelling assignment every week on Monday that you will apply immediately in your brand or business. We'll share with you the frameworks that are proven to help you clarify your story, amplify your impact, and simplify your life. We'll even have a private Facebook group so you can learn from and grow with your fellow Business of Story students. So if you'd like to captivate your audiences and elevate yourself, your business, and your people, visit businessofstory.com right now and reserve your seat. We only have a limited number of spots available in this very select cohort of storytellers. So pause this episode and save your place right now. Oh, and don't forget to come back because we have a marvelous show for you today. A symphony orchestra is typically made up of between 50 to 100 musicians playing in 4 different sections, including woodwinds, brass, percussion, and strings. A symphony is made up of several movements. Take Beethoven's Fifth, for instance. It has 4, an opening sonata allegro, a slower andante, and a fast scherzo which leads into the finale. Each movement may use up to 6 different music dynamics, the loudness of a note or passage, including from the very soft pianissimo, building to piano, mezzo forte, forte, and fortissimo, which, well, is very loud. And these dynamics are just the guardrails for all of the musical nuance, intonation, and attack and decay of each note the conductor must coax out of his musicians in a performance to make this multitude of musical language and personalities playing it sound like one moving performance. Does that sound like your organization? Maestro Roger Nierenberg uses this symphonic world to teach leaders and their teams how to orchestrate success in business. He calls it the music paradigm. Maestro Nierenberg immerses executives from such global brands as Boeing, IBM, the BBC, Philips, and Walmart into a symphony orchestra for an engaging and unforgettable learning experience about leadership and teamwork. The participants' attention is drawn to fascinating and unexpected organizational dynamics within the orchestra. People soon realize, however, that the music paradigm is much more than a riveting demonstration. It reveals compelling insights about how people work together. He also wrote the book Maestro, a surprising story about leading and listening. And he is with us today to describe how music has such a multi-dimensional impact on who we are, how we lead, and how we ultimately conduct business. Maestro, welcome to the business of story.
Hi, Park. How are you?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. Where are you coming to us from today?
From New York City.
You're in New York City, right downtown Manhattan?
I'm on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Great. Well, the weather's beautiful out here in Phoenix. Hopefully you are moving out of winter into spring there.
I'm sure it'll happen soon.
Eventually. Well, it's great to have you on the show because I've got a background, not to the extent certainly that you have in music, being a pianist and a composer as a kid growing up. And I got my degree in music composition and theory from Washington State University. But knowing that I probably wasn't going to make any money at that, I was also fortuitous in getting a degree in communications. And so I've been in the advertising branding world for the past 35 years. But because of my background in this and knowing how difficult it is to conduct a symphony, because I did it exactly one time, learning that I knew that I would never have to do that again, thank God, that it's awesome to have you here and talk about your life as a maestro conductor. How did you get your start? I mean, were you playing an instrument at a young age and just grew up in this, or did you always have this sense?
Well, I was a product of the school music system. In fourth grade, I started playing the trumpet, and soon I was playing in the elementary school band, and then the junior high school orchestra, and I just got an incredible, indescribable thrill of being part of a musical ensemble and feeling the vibrations through my body and the rhythm and the colors, and I fell head over heels in love with it, and I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
At an early age, in the fourth grade?
Well, I would say by the fifth grade.
Yeah.
There was another side of it, which was that I discovered the symphonies of Beethoven, and in them, I found this world, this other realm, which it felt so huge and so important and so true and timeless. And I thought, whatever this is what life is about.
Isn't that funny how it can have that kind of impact on you, where other people, quite often, they hear it, they love it, it sounds good to them, but it just doesn't resonate. And as you said, it actually felt like you could feel the vibrations moving through your body.
Yeah. Well, that especially while I was sitting in the orchestra. But when I was listening to the Beethoven symphonies, it was, of course, I wasn't there. I was listening to a recording of it. But nonetheless, I felt this thrill. It was as if there was this space that opened up, and that space was bigger than the world. It was certainly bigger than anything in my life, and beautiful, and I just wanted to be part of it.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island, suburb of New York City.
And were your parents musicians? Were they encouraging you to do this, or was it just something that found you?
Well, I think my parents encouraged me in whatever I wanted to do, but it became pretty clear that was what I wanted. So they were very encouraging, but they were not musicians, and they couldn't really guide me.
So you were on your own with your trumpet, and you began playing this in the fourth grade and grew into it. Did you learn other instruments, or where did your early years guide you in music?
Well, pretty much as soon as I could read music, I started writing music. I wanted to write music like the Beethoven symphonies, and about the age of 13, I started studying with a composer. And so my early training in music was in composition. By the time I went to college, that's what I thought I was going to be. That's what I wanted to do.
And what kind of music were you writing?
Well, how would I describe it now? At first, it was very tonal, but then I sort of got exposed to more dissonant vocabulary after I went to, the stuff that I wrote when I was in 10th grade was very impressionistic sounding. But then eventually it became more dissonant, became more influenced by Schoenberg and that music, that school, the Viennese school. And that was what I wrote a lot when I was in college.
And would you say where so many youth, are consumed by books and stories in that way, that maybe you were replacing that with music, that these musicians, Beethovens and so forth, were the storytellers in your life?
Well, they were the guides, they were the companions, it was as if there was this thing that understood me. And so it wasn't exactly like having a live person, but the composers were definitely my strongest influence.
And then where did you go from there? Did you obviously studied music in college, university?
I did, yeah. And I thought that I was going to be a composer, but I had always had a very strong interest in conducting. And the first time I stood in front of an orchestra, it was just before my junior year of high school. And so I was always really interested, and I continued to do it in college. And then there came the point where you decide, well, what profession do you want to pursue? And I just didn't think that composition was a good profession for me. I didn't feel like I was fluent enough. I didn't have the ear that I thought a composer needed. And so I decided I was going to become a conductor, and that was the career that I pursued.
I mentioned earlier when I was studying music composition theory, of course, orchestration and conducting was a course that we had to take. And I thought it would be easy. And I got to tell you, it was one of the most difficult courses I took. And our final, of course, was to stand up in front of the Washington State University Orchestra and conduct a piece. And I was terrified.
What did you find was difficult about it?
I wasn't comfortable in front of people, even to this day, playing the piano. My wife will say, Park, you can stand up in front of 5,000 people and teach them about storytelling in a keynote presentation or whatever. And that doesn't seem to bother you. But if we have 5 people in our living room, you won't play the piano for them.
Well, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I can understand that.
And I just felt like an imposter standing up in front of those orchestra members because I was never that great of a performer or a player. All of my buddies and my music student companions, they were performance majors and they were really incredible musicians. I never got to that level, probably for lack of practice, but I love to write. I wrote music and I compose. I just love that. But when I stood in front of that orchestra, I think, now, granted, I was, 20 years old maybe. I didn't have any confidence standing in front of them, and I felt like an imposter, like I had no business being there because these folks were such great musicians, and I had a hard time trying to translate that score to them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I wish you had been my student.
I wish I would have too. Thank you very much.
Of course, you were an imposter. You had the right feeling. You were an imposter. You weren't there to be an expert. You were there to learn. If your first exposure to conducting an orchestra is an exam, well, that's, first of all, it's not realistic. It doesn't really have very much to do with conducting. And there's so much to learn that one can learn about conducting, but you need to have it sort of uncoded for you and explain what things are. Time is very different on the podium than with any instrument, the sense of time. And then there's the sense of controlling the music, but without having any direct control over it. And all that feels very mysterious. And the first time I conducted an orchestra, I just couldn't believe how hard it was to get them to move. I felt like there was this huge weight at the end of my baton, and I could not get the orchestra to move. I didn't understand that I had to move ahead of the orchestra, that I didn't have to be with the orchestra. I could go out ahead. And that's one of the very important insights about conducting.
Well, yeah, you, are the leader of that. And in reviewing some of your videos on your website, themusicparadigm.com, you had a quote in there that says, the conductor is the natural enemy of the musician. You actually had, I think, a musician tell you that, yes, which is sort of a surprise.
He did me that favor on the eve of my rehearsal with that orchestra.
And how is that a favor?
Well, I'm saying that sarcastically because yes, I thought to myself, but that's not me. I'm not the enemy of the orchestra. But of course he was right. The conductor is the natural enemy of the orchestral musician, especially, the full-time musicians who spend their lives sitting in the orchestra. That's part of the reality that you accept. And you work within that in order to find a way to change your relationship with the orchestra. But the moment you step on the podium, you're not the friend of the musicians, and you never will be.
That's so interesting. So you graduated, where'd you go to university?
I went to Princeton University.
You graduated from Princeton. So one graduates as an orchestral conductor, which is quite a niche. There's not a lot of those.
I graduated as a composer.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There was no study of conducting at Princeton.
I got you. But you went into this very niche industry of conducting orchestras. How long did it take for you to land your first big gig in that area?
Well, let's see. I'd say about 7 really difficult years.
7 years how were you perfecting your craft in those 7 years?
I wasn't really. I was making a living. I was teaching. I was teaching at first it was at Mannes College of Music in the preparatory school, but then I was teaching at Queens College in New York, and I was teaching theory. And then eventually I started conducting the band there and the concert band at Columbia University. I led Gilbert and Sullivan troupe at Columbia University. I was just doing everything that I could. But eventually there was a position that opened up and I auditioned for it. And then I was chosen. And that was the beginning of my career.
And was that at the Jacksonville Symphony?
No. It was a very fine amateur chorus that worked with a professional orchestra.
Oh, okay.
And they had a wonderful music director, John Nelson, who had moved on to greater heights, and I became his successor.
Well, then you went on to conduct the Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra.
Well, my next post was with the Stamford Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, okay.
In Connecticut, and then eventually the Jacksonville Symphony. And I became a conducting student at Juilliard, and I conducted the Juilliard Pre-College Orchestra, which is a fantastic experience. Maybe the greatest high school orchestra in the world. And it was full of prodigies and great musicians and great people. And that was very formative for me also.
Can you take us to a time, and then I want to move on to how you are using music in your conducting experience to help leadership and leadership development. But before we do that, Roger, could you take us to a time when, because I could just picture this, we're sitting, the audience is there, rapt attention, waiting for the orchestra to fire up. The conductor comes out, everyone applauses, taps the stand, the orchestra sits down, the musicians, settle into their place, and the music begins. Did you ever have a moment somewhere along there where it all fell apart? And you then, as the leader of that orchestra, had to pull it together as quickly as possible?
That's a pretty extreme case. And I don't think I ever had a moment like that. There were moments where things went wrong in the performance. That sometimes happens. Not very often, but you certainly remember every one of those. And they're kind of humorous when you think back on them. And I don't know that it's all that interesting to talk about that. It becomes like an emergency. You've got to get people on track. And so your conducting gets very controlling and you kind of get everybody back to where they should be somehow. Mm-hmm. And if worse comes to worse, you stop the whole thing and begin again. And I heard a story about the New York Philharmonic getting completely lost and coming apart in a performance of a contemporary piece. And the principal violist of the orchestra who told me this story was Zubin Mehta stopped the orchestra and gave a bar and started the orchestra. And he did it so deftly that a lot of people didn't even realize that what had happened.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And it is interesting to us because, many of our listeners, if not all of our listeners, are leaders in their own right. And we've all showed up one day thinking we had all of our ducks in order, ready to conduct some sort of masterpiece on our own, in our own realms, only to have the wheels start falling off. And what do you do as a leader to pull yourself together, especially when you're in front of an audience, and to try to recover from that as quickly as possible and as deftly as possible so people don't recognize it?
Well, I think, first of all, if you're a really good leader, you devote a lot of energy and a lot of time in making sure that doesn't happen.
Correct.
Figuring out what are the necessary ingredients, what has to be in place, and then you track that in advance. And most of your kind of intense monitoring, intense controlling comes before the event, because what you don't want is during the event for something like that to happen. And if it ever should happen, then what you got to do is really go back and look and figure how could this have happened? Why was it not prevented? And I think that's a really important part of your job, is to make sure you know what the circumstances are that are necessary for success, and that you build it into your plan. Because once the plan is set and in place, it's very difficult to change it.
Now, isn't that the truth? So how did you then find yourself moving from conducting these symphonies into leadership development through listening and through your experience as a maestro conductor?
Well, I never really felt like I moved from one thing to the other, but I became at a certain point really interested in the audience, the contemporary audience, because it became painfully obvious to me that a lot of people just don't feel music the way that I feel it. They don't love it the way that I love it, and as a matter of fact, they feel intimidated by it. They feel turned off by it. And I began to see this as one of the very important problems. And I was always pretty articulate about introducing people to music. And I did a lot of, pre-concert talks and demonstrations and things like that. But I was looking for another way. And what I was really looking for was there some kind of environment that I could create which would bring people inside of the music and bypass the inhibitions that they had. That's what I was looking for. And that was how the music paradigm got created. That was what I was trying to build, and that was what I did build. And it was very successful. And what it involved was my stitching together from my entire career all the various things that had worked extremely well. And so where was I going to put the audience? Well, I thought I'm going to put them where I fell in love with music. I fell in love with music sitting in the orchestra, where I felt those vibrations on my body. So that's where I wanted to put my audience. So in my sessions, the audience is always seated amongst the musicians. But once I had tried this out and launched it, it was a corporate CEO who invited me to do it for his organization when he heard about what I was trying to do. And it was so successful. And what was unanticipated was that it had very high business value. It became a very productive way for business organizations to communicate things to their people that they couldn't normally communicate. And so then I started getting inquiries from business organizations about whether, I could do this for them. And because I customized every session for every particular client and made them about what this particular business success picture was and what the challenges and the impediments were, after I did it for a couple of dozen times, I began to know a lot about business organizations and what their challenges are and what the solutions that they were prescribing for themselves. So it just sort of happened in an unanticipated but very natural and organic way that I began to develop a new expertise. But it was always based on my experience as a conductor, and it was always based on things that really happen in orchestras.
And so you started this enterprise out just to get people to embrace and understand music and make music more approachable in their lives by putting them into the orchestra. And it wasn't until then that you had business leaders experiencing this and saying, you actually have a method, a vehicle here that you could help us in leadership development and team development and that sort of thing. Do I have that right?
Yes. Well, what happened was I was introduced to some consultants, a consulting firm in New York, and they said, well, why don't you do it for us? So I did, and they really saw the potential of it, and they started placing me with their clients. So suddenly, the first engagement I had was with the CEO and his team for American Express Financial Advisors, and the next one was for the CEO of Bristol Myers Squibb. So I was dealing with these Fortune 100 companies at the very highest level. That was how I began this. But it began as a way of introducing people to the artistic experience of music, and it still is. That's my goal. But of course, it's not why my clients engage me. They engage me because they want to have a fantastic meeting. They want their people to be energized. They want them to really respect the organization. They also want them to see possibilities that are right in front of their people, but their people can't see them. They want to enlighten them about potential that exists, and they want to fire them up about a kind of success that may be vaguely clear to them, but after they've sat in on what happens, it becomes crystal clear. Everybody understands exactly what it is that they're trying to achieve and what the strategy is and what kind of a role they could play in it and the kind of power that they have to bring it about that they may not have realized before. All of those things and many more.
And they're doing this in a very surprising venue, and that is among orchestra members as you are conducting them. And I'm on your website looking at your clientele. It's virtually a who's who of America, well, and some international companies, IBM, BBC, Qualcomm, Lilly, McKesson, New York Life. So how long ago did you start this? And I imagine it's just grown since then.
Well, it was about 20 years ago that I started it. And, I started at the very top of the field in that I was dealing with Fortune 100 corporations and at the CEO level. But then the clientele, the word of mouth brought me to many other companies. So now, yeah, it's true that there are a lot of companies that have participated in this. And I learn every time. I learn on many different levels. But I think mostly I'm learning about what the business organization's aspirations are, what the changes are that they're trying to bring about. And it's very difficult to change a workforce.
And it must also give you a little bit of glimpse into corporate America and the trending that's going on and how these leaders might be working together to get people. Maybe it's surrounding diversity, inclusion. Maybe it's surrounding the clarity of the brand story and getting everyone pulled together. I would imagine working with them that you see this trending maybe before a lot of us see it because you get exposed to so many of these large organizations.
Well, everybody knows. You don't have to know much to know that the world is changing. And the technology, I mean, at this time, artificial intelligence it's already disrupting the world and it's going to disrupt it more. And, we have these huge changes and they happen so fast. When you think about, Facebook 10 years ago was barely in existence, and now it's come to dominate the world in so many different ways. That never used to happen, 25 years ago. It took decades to build a world brand. And so the issues that make an organization successful, they are changing. And the thing is, if you're running a big organization and you train people to be successful in a certain way, when that changes, it's really hard to get them all to change because they get attached to the success that they have had. So one of the things that you have to do in order to create the environment where people will be receptive to even seeing it is to take them out of their success context and all the wealth and all the power and influence that they've acquired. So what you do is you put them in the middle of the orchestra and they're nothing there. They don't know anything. They don't know about what's happening. They don't know what's going to be asked of them. And so it's a kind of disorienting place for them to be. But at the same time, I make it extremely pleasurable for them. So it's hard for them to not be happy there because there's a lot of laughter that happens. And then there's fascination. And that's how it begins. It begins with fascination about what's going on. And it feels incredibly alive because it's unscripted and because the musicians, although we've practiced the music for an hour, but they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to be asked of them. And then they're asked to comment about things that are going on. And so it has this atmosphere of, it's very dramatic. It's very exciting to have something which is so fresh and improvised going on right in front of them in a business meeting where there's no improvisation in business meetings. Everything is scripted, and they tend to be pretty stale. And so what I do is I create something which is dramatic and fun and fascinating, and then enlightening, and then revelatory. And they begin to see themselves and their behavior and their possibilities in a new light. That's part of the reason I think that it's been so successful.
It just sounds like an amazing experience. I would love to, if you're ever out here in Phoenix, sit in on one.
I think I will be in Phoenix.
Oh, will you?
I don't have a date yet, but we have to be in touch because I'd like you to come.
Yeah, I would love to sit in. We even do a follow-up show once I actually experience this. But could you take us through the experience? So say I've contacted you and I'm bringing you out to Phoenix to work with my team. What happens? Take us through a session, would you?
Well, sure. But the first thing I have a conversation with you, I say, okay, what's this meeting about? You know, who's going to be there? Who are these people? And why? How did you choose them? And why are you taking the trouble to have this meeting? It's expensive. People have to leave their desks and put away their work. And that's the most expensive part of it. And why is it worth it? What's the success picture? What's going on? What is the aspiration? And then I ask, so what's holding you back? What are the challenges? Why isn't this already happening? And then you answer me, but I probe the answers that you give me because I want to understand it very deeply. And in addition to what I've discovered is that I can ask tougher questions than business consultants can, because business consultants understand they have a client, a certain relationship with their clients, and they don't want to challenge their clients. But I'm just a musician, so I ask really, really tough questions, but not because I want them to be tough, but just because I really want to understand. They may say, well, we want them to understand this or that. We want them to understand that they have to connect across the silos. And I might say something like, well, that's pretty obvious. I mean, don't they understand that? And a business consultant would never say that. But for a conductor, you can say that. Anyway, I get a clear picture of what it is that the organization is trying to achieve and what's holding them back. And then I try to figure out, all right, well, how am I going to grow these very behaviors in a symphony orchestra right in front of their eyes? And I design role-playing exercises in which I say to the musicians, we're going to imagine this. If this was our mindset, if this was the kind of orchestra we were, how would this passage sound? Mm-hmm. For example, let's say you have an organization. This is not a common problem, but it is for some organizations where territoriality is a big problem. People where they get either attached to their own career, and that's their primary concern, or they get attached to the success of their team or their division. And it's a problem because if you have one division growing at a different pace than another, then you can find yourself in the situation, for example, you're selling more than you have the capacity to produce. And then you're creating problems for your customer service and for your brand. So there has to be coordination across the entire organization. And what interferes with that is territoriality. It does happen. But I might say to the orchestra, what would it be like if your primary concern was if you had a sort of zero-sum idea that if any other musician in the orchestra sounded good, that was somehow a threat to you, and you want people to hear you and to be impressed by you? what would that be like? So the orchestra plays, and of course it turns into a shouting match immediately. That's an interesting demonstration. But the more interesting demonstration is when I fix it and I say, okay, we're going to play the same passage, but this time your goal is, because of the way you play, you want the other musicians to play better. How would it sound? Now, the musicians spontaneously, they have to adopt a different kind of attitude about the work and about their role and about the other people. So they've given up their territoriality, and then the orchestra sounds this kind of transparent, and you can hear so many things at once, and it's so detailed, and that's a profound demonstration. And everybody in the audience is thinking, what if we were that way? What if our organization was that transparent?
And the metaphor is very powerful. So a bunch of questions popped up in my mind as you were going through that. I could just envision that going down. So say you're working with my group. It's about territoriality here in Phoenix, and you're coming out. Where do you find your musicians? Do you tap into the Phoenix Symphony or Orchestra? Or how do you gather your symphony? Because I'm assuming that they don't travel with you.
No, I always use the local orchestra wherever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hire a contractor. There was the personnel manager from the Phoenix Symphony who did it for me at first. And then I don't believe he's still with the Phoenix Symphony, because I've been doing it with them for more than 20 years. And but he still does the contracting for me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I find the orchestra. And the orchestra shows up. They have a 1-hour rehearsal for me, which is mostly about getting used to playing in this unusual setup. We have all these chairs that are in the middle of the orchestra so that the lines of communication are a little different. And then the audience comes in, and then we begin.
Now, do your musicians have any idea what they're signing up for?
Well, if they've done it with me before, yes, they do.
They've been there, yeah.
But,
all right.
It's very easy. They're enthusiastic because they really enjoyed it before, and they always learn something. Yeah, but they don't know what I'm going to do. And if I'm working with the same set of musicians that I've worked before, I always check to find out what I did with them before, because I don't repeat it. I want to do something different so that it always challenges them.
But this idea is you're being driven, in this case, this hypothetical case, by the story of territoriality that you're trying to help a client overcome. You've got the musicians in there. Does then what your outcome, what you're trying to achieve, does that influence what piece you choose to play? Because I notice on your website, when I go through all of the different pieces, you use a lot of different musicians, Haydn, Barber, adagios for strings, and others. So is that what you're trying to achieve? Does that impact the score that you perform?
Well, if territoriality is a big issue, well, then I want an orchestra with a lot of different kinds of sections. I won't have a string piece only. I'll have many different kinds. Same thing with diversity. If an organization has diversity issues, and some organizations do, then I'll be sure that I have brass and winds and percussion and strings, and so that we have lots of different colors in the orchestra. For other issues where it might be leadership, then it would be perfectly okay to have an all-string piece. But the choice of the music is decided in part by the size of the group, because I've done sessions as small as 25 participants and as large as 2,000. So if you're having 2,000 people, then you want a big orchestra and you want a lot of sound. So there are many factors. Another thing is the room. What kind of room is it going to be? If it's a very boomy room, well, then I'll probably choose a piece like the Adagio for strings, because you don't have to have a lot of clear definition. Whereas if it's a very dry room, I'm definitely not going to do a piece like that, because it won't sound good.
Mm-hmm. So then you get the musicians in, you practice for an hour. Do your students, your clients, sit there and listen to the rehearsal as a part of the overall program, or is that they come in later?
Normally, no, but I want them to do that more and more, because what I've discovered is that while I'm doing the rehearsal, I'm actually modeling the kind of leadership behaviors that are important to them. Because a lot of what a conductor has to do with a new orchestra is persuade them. We conductors, and I think leaders too, we're all extremely motivated for the kind of success. The problem we have is that the workforce is not as motivated as we are. They're motivated in a different way. They want other things, but they don't want what we want. And our job is how to get them interested in the kind of success that we foresee and to own it. So that's what happens during the rehearsal. Well, if it's framed that way, and I have an orientation before the rehearsal, well, then they can sit in and they can watch me work. And there are many things to observe from that. But normally, clients don't do that. They just show up for the session. And the session is where I do the role plays and the demonstrations.
So take us then into a session. You've just seated my team. They are now amongst your musicians, and you begin playing the piece. Where do you take us? What happens next?
You're right that the first thing we do once I get introduced, I stand up and I conduct, because I don't want any words. I want the music first. That's the first thing. And so they've experienced the music, but they don't have any orientation. So then I sort of introduce the notion of the orchestra as a kind of a model for what happens in organizations. Sometimes I say it's the greatest laboratory for the understanding of leadership. Sometimes I say, what if it's a group of professionals that have a particular competitive advantage and then I mention whatever it is that they want to have the competitive advantage for collaboration, for alignment. And I say, and you're here to steal as much of their expertise as possible and transplant it into your own professional life, thereby bringing greater prosperity not only to yourself, but to all who work with you. So that's a nice picture, isn't it?
It really is.
So it's attractive. And then I give a sort of an observation exercise. I ask him to select a single musician and just any one of the members of the orchestra, and just observe the amazing athleticism, the coordination, the strength, the speed. And then I start conducting the orchestra, and I do it for maybe a minute, or so, and then I stop. And then I go out into the audience, and I hand the microphone to somebody unsuspecting, and I say, "So, what did you hear?" And I say it just like that. What did you hear? As if it's the simplest thing. Of course, the reality is that this is a big dramatic moment, because this doesn't happen in business meetings, that people get called on without raising their hands, because it puts that person in how would I put it? It's a dangerous position. You're being asked to comment about something that you don't know anything about, and you're being asked to do it in front of all the people who are most important in your career. It's high stress, but I do it so lightly. And then whatever they say, I find a way inside of it to find the most important truth that they've touched upon, so that they end up, contributing a lot through the comment that they made, even though they didn't know that they were going to contribute. So what that does is it sets up this dynamic of, like, it gets very dramatic, and then it gets fun again. And then I keep on upping the stakes on each intervention. Then I start bringing people from their chairs up to stand on the podium and listen to the orchestra from there, and then to comment. And it gets more and more interactive, until finally there's somebody who's standing on the podium with the baton in his or her hand, except I'm doing the conducting, I'm moving their hand. But they're feeling that type of leadership, what it feels like when you have an organization which is great at aligning, is expert at communicating with each other, and then the leadership doesn't have to be telling people what to do. It rather goes to a higher strategic level. It deals with the flow of the work and the flow of the organization. And it's very enlightening to see how that kind of leadership can actually give you much more control than when you try to control it yourself. So there are really powerful and profound lessons about leadership and organizations that come out.
And I would imagine the groups that you have in there, probably 60 to 70% of the people sitting in that room are not musicians, or maybe they play a little bit, here and there.
I think 95%.
Okay. So they're completely out of their comfort zone. And
right.
Yet it sounds like, and judging by how long you've done this and for whom you do it for, that it has tremendous impact. What are some of the things non-musicians, maybe people that were kind of standoffish about classical music and orchestras, as you said early in the show, that they just weren't connecting with it? What do they say to you after having these experiences? What are the epiphanies that they experience?
Well, people talk about the insights that they had. For example, there's one guy who said to me, he said, what I got out of this is that when I go up the staircase, down the corridor and up the staircase for a meeting with my boss, and he chews me out for a half hour, and then I come down the staircase and I go back through the corridor to my office, what I realize is that everybody is watching me. And by the way I carry my body, they're judging how safe they are. Now that's a beautiful insight, isn't it? What he saw was how much you can reveal through your body, and how people can read bodies, and how much of that kind of thing goes on and impacts the organization. So that was one insight. And that's fascinating. I never would have planted anything like that. I wouldn't have known that much about it.
And did he get that insight from, do you think, watching you conduct, or was it a combination of watching you conduct and your body language and your expressions and how the orchestra reacted and maybe the body language of some of the musicians?
During every session, I model some bad conducting. I model some dysfunctional leadership. I might model somebody who micromanages the orchestra much more than they need to. I might model somebody who feels like the orchestra doesn't need any guidance and doesn't really guide them. I choose the dysfunction I'm going to model based on which dysfunctions are alive in that organization, which I've learned through my questions. And so they see, and afterwards I talk to the musicians. I say, what's it like working with that conductor? And so they see that the way you behave and the way you carry yourself immediately is read by the workforce. And I think that that's what, of course, they show it in the way they play, but afterwards they describe it. And I think that's what he was seeing. He was seeing that the way he carries himself is being read by his people in the way the orchestra read the conductor.
And the videos that I watched of you on YouTube doing this, the one thing that struck me too is that I did not get the sense that your musicians, your orchestra members, were in cahoots with you. They weren't really knowing what was going to happen next. So when you have them, share their insights or what they're experiencing or how they're feeling, it is very real. And I guess I was thinking they'd be maybe a little bit more scripted, but they're not scripted at all in any way, shape, or form.
No, I think that's what's disarming about the session. Because, at the beginning, you have a lot of skeptical people. And I acknowledge that. I invite them to be skeptical. I tell them that it's unscripted, but basically I say, I don't expect you to believe that. And then from time to time, when I'm talking to a musician, I say, do you know what I'm going to ask you to do now? And they say no. And because it's so real, it's really hard for people to be skeptical about it, because it is actually happening. It's happening right in front of their eyes. And so you can't argue about that. You might argue that the musical metaphor is not apt, and in some ways it is not. There are some basic ways in which it is always very apt, and that's what I try to focus on. But there's some that are not. You can argue with that. But the general principles and the effect of a particular behavior on an organization, you can't dispute it because it happened.
When did you experience your aha moment? Because you started this to just help expose more people and open up, make classical music and orchestra, symphony, more approachable. And yet then you saw at some point, must have had this epiphany or this moment of saying, this could actually make companies and teams inside of corporations stronger. Can you take us to that moment when you went, wow, there's something greater here than I didn't first see, that you've built the whole music paradigm on?
Well, it was early along that I realized that it could be very effective for businesses. I didn't realize how effective it could be, but I thought it could be very effective. But I envisioned that those people were going to end up in the audience of symphony orchestras. That was the thing that I was aiming for.
Sure.
That was the thing that I really cared about. But yeah, at a certain point, I finally realized it, but it was not when I was imagining all this stuff, when I was dreaming it up. It just happened as a kind of I can't say it was an accident, but it was a lucky discovery and a lucky coming together of some very important forces, that the way the world was evolving. Because when I started doing this, 20 some odd years ago, everyone was communicating by fax. That was the new fast way of communicating.
Technology, yes.
Yeah. And the fact that the communication is so lightning fast now, and we expect it, that has made organizations have to be, well, the way they described it in the 1990s was, they say, flatter, faster, more flexible, and more friendly. That was the 4 F's of what organizations needed to be. And the orchestra just happens to be the perfect vehicle for demonstrating those things. So it was lucky that the way business evolved and the way society evolved made the orchestra a much more important tool for organizations to see the direction into which they had to evolve.
And isn't it interesting where you were trying to attract more audiences this way, showing them music and how music has an energy all of its own that created this even third more powerful thing of teaching and training, teamwork and diversity and inclusion. Why do you think music, forget the orchestra for a minute, you certainly a very, very tangible part of this are the players themselves, because you are conducting and leading a team there. But why do you think the music has such a powerful effect and pull on your audiences and your clients?
Well, there are 2 ways I can answer it. I'm going to answer a question that you didn't exactly ask, but I think that is behind what you're asking, which is, why is music so effective for demonstrating these kinds of dynamics between people?
Couldn't have said it better myself, yes.
Right. And it's partially because music it's very condensed. It takes things happen in music much faster than they do in life, so that a behavior turns into its result almost instantaneously in music. That you communicate something to a group of people, they absorb it, they then act on it, and they produce a result. Well, that can happen in a matter of seconds. Whereas in real life, in an organization, it could take weeks for that same process to happen. So because things are unfolding so fast, it's a lot easier for people to connect the dots of what just happened in the orchestra, because the dots are much closer together. And then what they do is they make the translation between what happened in the orchestra and what's happening in their own life. So it really is a kind of a fast motion lens to see big patterns in their professional behavior and their relationship with their teams that they might never see it. That's the way you get people to get on board of change, because they've become much more aware of the burning platform of why the change is necessary. And also they get a picture of what it'll be like when the organization makes those changes, what the great advantages that will accrue. The other thing about music is that it's very transparent. meaning that you can listen to just one part of it, or you can listen to the whole thing, and you can listen to both of them at the same time. So it's a great way of kind of like seeing what's going on at your desk, and what comes in your inbox, and what you process, and what you're going to put in your outbox on that level. But also, it kind of enables you to imagine all the walls coming down in all the workspaces, so that if everybody could access everybody else's work simultaneously, that's kind of what music provides, because it is so transparent. Those are some of the reasons that music is such a great vehicle for this.
Yeah, I never thought about that idea of being sort of this fast action happening real time right now, these little behaviors, which then leads me to the idea of nuance and how nuance can have such an enormous impact over time, either immediately or not, depending on how you're leading and how you're conducting and how you are communicating with your people and your musicians.
Yeah, people think that nuance doesn't matter in life, but it actually does a lot. The tone of voice that you use, the way you say things, the way you look, all that. Well, that
Body language, as you mentioned.
yeah, it's immediately evident with the conductor. That's the conductor's main avenue of communication. And when they see that having effect, they begin to reflect on that, and they begin to think about, is this a tool that I could use? What am I communicating in that way?
Well, it's interesting, and you've captured this approach in your book. I think it came out in 2009, called Maestro: A Surprising Story About Leading Through Listening.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. You had said on your website that it took you a while to find the voice and the tone of that book, and then you finally wrote it in a parable, I guess, and how this world of listening and leadership and symphonies, your world, came together.
Well, as soon as I started doing the music paradigm, right at the beginning, people started asking me, have you written about this? And then lo and behold, maybe a year later or so, there was a worldwide broadcast on the BBC, and somebody, a literary agent who was on vacation in Turkey, he saw it and he called me up back in New York. He said, would you like to write a book? So I said, sure. He figured, well, do you want to write it, or should we get you a ghostwriter? And I thought, well, I can't write a book. I need somebody to help me. So we found a really good writer to work with me, and then he sold the book to a publisher, and we started working on it, and we worked on it, and it went on for years, and we weren't getting anywhere. I would interview clients of mine who said this had a profound effect on them. One woman, I remember, she said she won a leadership award on Leading from the Front was the name of the award, and she attributed it to the experience she had while she was in the session. And I tried to get her to talk about it, and she couldn't talk about it. I mean, she talked, but she couldn't describe it, because it's a funny thing. It's so important and it's so fundamental that it's really difficult to talk about. It's one of these ineffable things that gets to a truth which is kind of beyond words. So I began to find that everything we were doing it just sounded so trite when you put it in language. It just didn't capture it at all. And finally, my writer, he said to me, I can't do this. It's too discouraging. And I agreed with him. So I gave back the advance to the publisher, and I paid off the writer. And I thought, well, I have another way that I'm going to write it. I'm going to, instead of talking to my clients about what it meant to them, because I understood it better than they did, I decided I was going to take all of my clients and roll them into one character and make him the protagonist of the book. And it was going to be not only about ideas, but it was going to be about his experience and his transformation. And then I invented another character, which was a conductor, who becomes kind of like the guide for the business executive as he's going through these changes. And I was influenced by this book that was very popular at the time called Tuesdays with Morrie.
Oh, yeah.
which is
I remember
about a
that.
mentor and the conversations that his student has with him. And I said, I'm going to kind of turn this into a Tuesdays with Maury. It's going to be conversations between this executive and the conductor. And so the structure of it is that the executive has a leadership problem at the office in the business. It's very frustrating for him. He can't get people to behave the way he needs them to behave. He doesn't know what to do about it. And then he goes to a rehearsal and he watches the conductor conduct the orchestra. He scrutinizes him and he thinks about what is he doing and why is he saying that? And he's saying things that seem to him quite wrong. Like when the conductor says to the orchestra at one point, he said, "Don't watch me here." And afterwards, he's talking to the conductor. He says, "How can you tell them not to watch you? And what's wrong with telling them what to do?" And the conductor explains to him that telling people what to do is one way, but it's very limited. You get very limited result with that. You get mostly people just sounding like they're doing what they're supposed to do rather than having the essence of what it is you're trying to bring about for them to take ownership of it and do it as if they're choosing it themselves. And so after that conversation, he knows how he's going to handle that situation. And there are a series of those things. And over the course of the book, the executive transforms his idea about what being a leader is.
I wish I had that book when I was studying conducting at WSU way back when. Sounds like it's a good instruction on conducting too.
It's kind of for conductors, it's advanced, but I did write it for conductors too, but primarily for executives.
Yeah.
So therefore, I went back to the publisher and I said, "I don't need a ghostwriter for this. I'm just going to write it myself, and I don't want to write the other book that you bought from me. I want to write this book." And they said, "Well, we don't want to buy that. We want the one that we offered." So I just wrote it on my own, and then fortunately, I was able to find a really great publisher and get it published eventually. But that whole process took me 10 years.
And where can people find your book?
Anywhere where you can buy books online.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Maestro, a surprising story about leading through listening, and you can find it too on your website at themusicparadigm.com.
Right.
Yeah. One last question before I let you go, because I imagine you've got some conducting to do out there. For our listeners, next time they're listening to a piece of music, what should they listen for to think about as a metaphor for themselves as a leader or directing a team or so forth? So maybe we're not sitting in Phoenix Symphony Hall, but I'm listening to one of my favorite bands, or maybe I'm listening to a symphonic piece. What can I pull from that in just my own little world to make me a better leader?
I wouldn't advise it.
Okay.
I think that is only going to lead you astray. It's going to interfere with your experience of the music. It's going to, instead of listening, you'll be thinking. So I think that you need a guide for that. If you find somebody, but even musicians, they don't know how to be that kind of guide. So I would say look at the Music Paradigm website, read the book. Those are the best ways, I would say. And then eventually come to one of my sessions. Look at where the sessions are being held, because there is a calendar, and see if you can get into one. And then you'll be ready to, then you'll sort of know. Mm-hmm. You'll know what the performers are going through in order to produce that sound. And that will enlighten you about how you might think about your own work that could make you more powerful.
Well, I'll keep an eye on your calendar, and please let me know next time you're coming through Phoenix. I would love to see if I could sit in on one of those sessions and take it all in. And thank you so much, Maestro Nierenberg, for being here with us on the Business of Story. It's just been a fabulous conversation.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it myself.
And I'd like to thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard here today, and you've got leaders in your organization or in your family or colleagues that you think would benefit from this, please feel free to share this episode with them and look into Maestro's work. I mean, it's really amazing over at themusicparadigm.com. It's just something that's near and dear to my heart, because I've always been about this intersection of commerce and advertising, marketing, and music, and of course, how it has come out in my life as a the conductor of storytelling, I guess, for lack of a better definition at this point. But thank you for listening. Of course, if I can be of service to you, you know where to find me over at businessofstory.com, where I've got tools, tips, techniques, and talented individuals, story artists, like you just heard today, to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And until next week, when we will have another incredible story artist on right here on the Business of Story, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.